All right. Hello, hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. Welcome to Poster House. My name is Jillian. I'm the programs coordinator here. Um, Thanks. I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd, so thank you for being here. But for those who don't know, Poster House is the first and only museum in the U.S. dedicated to the art and history of the poster. Just a few accessibility things. Bathrooms are going to be back towards the door where you came from on the left-hand side. We have listening devices and fidget tools at the front desk if anybody needs those things. And I'm just going to introduce these folks and pass it off to them. Tonight we are joined by Mike King, whose exhibition is downstairs. Yes. It has many wonderful examples of his very prolific career as a gig post designer. So be sure to check that out when you can, if you haven't already. And then on the other side of the ring, fighting tonight, we have Ted Bahr, who's representing the psychedelic posters side of the argument. And I'll pass it off to them to duke it out. So without further ado, here we go.
Hey.
I and like peace and love. I don't want to fight.
Yeah.
I even have my flower power beer. Ha!
Far out, man. Where does this start? I should look at my.
We do a quick
a
quick introduction. So
quick introduction. Feel free to go first if you like.
Sure.
Or I can go first if you like.
you can go first. Well, you're the real artist.
That is true. Yeah, generally, since I'm Mike King. I make posters and have made posters for a long time. I am a hopeless devotee of the punk aesthetic. Not as much the music as just the look of things, which is just, whatever, distorted, fucked up, grim, gritty, just happy. And so, yeah, that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. My show is downstairs. Hopefully you will see it at some point. Because we don't have time for you to go see it now. I would normally say, oh, well, we'll wait and you can go look at it, but that's probably not going to work. So anyway, yeah, I've been making posters for four decades, really starting out in the very late 70s. And then I eventually became a graphic designer and kept making posters. And then after about a decade, it was my job. And now I continue in that rut. And yeah, I'm here to talk about why Ted is hopelessly wrong.
So I'm Ted Bahr, and I am also thoroughly enamored with the poster form. And actually, I love Mike's posters. Mike, can I hug you? Anyway,
yeah. We're gonna have like a big group hug at the end.
See, that will mean that I won.
Like a total fucking kumbaya moment.
If it's a mosh pit instead, then he won.
Well, it can be both.
It's not really a battle. It's not really a debate.
No,
it's art. So, but anyway, I own the Bar Gallery in Oyster Bay on Long Island, and I opened it 8 years ago. It's my retirement job and my passion. I had built a large collection of psychedelic posters in my company, and then I sold the company, and my wife said, well, those posters are not coming home. Why don't you just open an art gallery? So that's what I did. It's the only art gallery in the country dedicated to late 60s psychedelic rock posters. Come visit. I also have been working for the last several years on a documentary, and you can see the image down here on your left is that's a business card logo thing, but that's actually a photo of the big five psychedelic poster artists. And I have a filmmaker, and we're working on a documentary called San Francisco's Big Five and the Psychedelic Poster Revolution. So I'm deeply immersed in this space. And so we're going to go back and forth. I'm going to go first because I have the clicker, and then Mike can just pummel me after that. So first, it's really important to give you a sense of the context, especially what's interesting is Mike and I have had a great time talking about this discussion battle that we're having. And the thing is that he's really his posters were really a reaction to my period, but I don't have anything. I need to set the tone for you. Whereas, where do we come from? So the psychedelic posters rose out of the conformist military industrial society that the 1950s represented.
Thank God we don't have that anymore. It's great.
But anyway, so yes, in 1963, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, it blew a hole in the heart of a whole generation of baby boomers that were hopeful and now had to figure out another way. And so we saw a variety of society upheaval and revolutions, including civil rights, the gay and feminist revolutions. Her hair was getting longer while skirts were getting shorter, and the Beatles led the invasion of rock and roll into the country. Along with this was an increase in the use of marijuana and then LSD, which was legal until October 1966. So the world was going in a more psychoactive direction, and nowhere more than in San Francisco, particularly in Haight-Ashbury. So in 1965, you had a number of different, basically what you'd call today raves, multimedia events that were attended by acid heads now, or people that were taking LSD, and they all converged in January 1966 at something called the Trips Festival. That's represented by the poster over on your right, which was done by Wes Wilson, who's considered the founder of the psychedelic poster. And that event was attended by 10,000 people in January 1966. So it was a real mind blower for everybody. At that point, promoters Chet Helms and Bill Graham realized that they could start doing these dance concerts
Ka-ching.
and happiness on a regular basis at the Fillmore and the Avalon.
Yeah. I'm not against peace. I'm just against. I'm just in favor of violence. I mean, I think that where I'm coming from with all of this is there's a reason why he has to sort of set it up so I can try to tear it down. As a poster artist for years and years and years, people have always said to me, "Oh yeah, far out. You make posters just like the posters from the 60s, like the Fillmore posters and all that." And none of those people got it at all. I make them in spite of the posters of the 60s and in kind of active opposition to them. I grew up as a hippie child in the late 60s, early 70s, with a lot of kind of firsthand experience of a lot of kind of hippie culture and things like that. I was on Ken Kesey's bus. I actually did hang out with Wavy Gravy in a geodesic dome in Northern California. So I did get to see some of this stuff firsthand, and ultimately it was disillusioning. It was all, it's like my parents and all of our neighbors and all of that stuff, nobody, it didn't seem to go anywhere. Nothing really got any better. The world was still as fucked up as it ever was. And then once I heard punk rock, then it was like, oh, this seems to make sense, because this is my reality. This is not some sort of technicolor dream of what could be, which after whatever 5 years, 10 years of doing whatever you want and having long hair and taking drugs or whatever. Not that I was taking a lot of drugs in the very early 70s, because I was still just a pretty young kid, but it all started to ring pretty false and I was pretty disillusioned by all of it. So I was just waiting for something to come that was in opposition to it. And luckily something came.
Okay. Ding.
Ding.
Round one. Major influences that ran through the psychedelic poster movement. And so the first two on the left was sort of a recapitulation or reimagining of the Wild West. And so the early hippies in San Francisco often dressed as cowboys and took, and then on the right you have some Native American imagery and the totem pole with the Moby grape. Those are, these were influences. There was a sense that the Native American culture was more authentic, living a more authentic life than the 1950s conformists. And at the same time, they were out there in the West, and the West had sort of been represented by John Wayne 1950s, and they were reimagining it in a more psychedelic direction. So these were two very important early influences. And then the other major influence for the psychedelic posters, of course, is Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau movement, which was 1890 to 1910 approximately, was a time of revolt against industrialization. And so similar in nature, in origin, and also the elements of Art Nouveau style, the flowing curved line, the organic nature, women, peacocks, rivers, other sort of thematic uses lent themselves to the psychedelic and tripping and stoned and things like that, very organic. And so that was another major source. And you see the Job Girl on the far left by Alphonse Mucha, and then Mouse and Kelly next to it hopped up the colors and turned it into the Job Joint Girl, and then just a couple of other examples over there.
Oh, so these are sort of examples of things that sort of led, that amongst many things that it sort of inspired sort of more punk design. John Hartfield, famous propaganda anti-fascist designer from Germany, who made all of this stuff that was very much against the Nazis at a time when he could have pretty much just ended up in a camp, but he kept doing it, which was pretty great. And then and anybody who recognizes that might recognize its later iteration as the cover of a Discharge record. Over here is just an extra delightful example of Dada, which with the idea of kind of cutting things up and recombining them into even more, taking absurd images and recombining them into even more absurd images, I think was a big inspiration on a lot of like punk designers. Mad Magazine, which I think is the one kind of touchstone that I think we can both agree on. The irreverence of Mad Magazine. This is a great example too, because at the time, yeah, the hippies were really into Mad Magazine too, and Alfred E. Newman didn't give a shit, which I thought is pretty good. So no fear in biting the hand that feeds you. That's a good way to stay relevant and irreverent. Influence of designer. Punk design makes use of the media we are bombarded with daily, from comic books, newspapers, advertising, changing the context in the best work and turn it against itself and into social commentary. That's something that I wrote.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, the Mad comic, actually Mad Magazine started as Mad Comics in 1953, and the psychedelic poster artists all grew up reading Mad Comics, Mad Magazine, as it became later, and it was an enormous influence, and it was the only thing that was satirical, essentially, out there. So just reading the publication would turn you into a member of the counterculture without you even knowing it. So. Ding. Okay, so lettering. Lettering is a very important part of understanding the psychedelic posters.
And an important part of posters in general.
Absolutely. On the far left here, you see an old poster from the 1950s or early 1960s. It's known as a boxing style of poster. It's very straightforward. You can read it. You can read it from
It's actually from the 40s. 1948. It says so right there. The importance of lettering.
Yes, well, in any case, it is a boxing style poster, and as psychedelics and marijuana began to be used and the bands became increasingly psychedelic with longer jams and different sounds, the posters started to reflect that as well. And so you see in the middle is a May 1966 poster by Wes Wilson, and where the lettering is starting to pulsate and move and melt. And then another example of lettering, classic psychedelic lettering, is the flame style of lettering that's over on the right. And that poster from July 1966, Wes Wilson considers to be the first truly psychedelic poster because the lettering actually formed the shape, the image and the lettering were one. Wilson was also inspired greatly by the 1965 Jugendstil exhibition, which was in Oakland Museum of November 1965. Jugendstil is the German version of Art Nouveau. And so on the far left, you see a poster by Alfred Roller from 1902 for the Vienna Secession. And if you look really closely, you'll notice that it's actually an opposite. It's like backwards. I don't know how I did pick that image, but it's a mirror image.
By mistake.
But you wouldn't actually notice because you can't read the letters anyway. That's the point. Anyway, in the middle, you see the letters blown up for you. And then on the right, you see Wes Wilson's use of that Vienna Secessionist style. He adapted it to his own, but that became his signature lettering style. And then finally, here's a few other examples of psychedelic lettering. Again, the goal was to be as illegible as possible and make you spend time with the poster. So traditionally, a poster meant to get across its image as quickly as possible and simply as possible. But the psychedelic poster artists were stretching it out, making you work, making you spend a lot of time to try to understand what was going on. And if you could, then you were part of the tribe. Then you could go to the event, you'd understand it. So here you have in the bottom left some flower lettering from Victor Moscoso. You have in the upper right, you have the Grateful Dead, very elaborate lettering style by Rick Griffin, one of the other big five. And that's actually was also used for their album Oxymoxa. And if you cut off the letters just right, it actually says "ate the acid" in the middle of it. And then the bottom right is Rick Griffin, and that lettering is so elaborate that it's actually not even lettering. So those are just shapes that look like letters. And both of the Rick Griffins
My mind is blown, man.
on the right give you a nod as to what was going to happen later on with graffiti writing. And finally, in the upper left, can anyone read what that says?
I can.
Yeah. So what that is that's some of the most challenging lettering in this field, which is negative space lettering. So what's happening is the black is the letter and the red is the space between the letters. And so yes, it spells TRPS, which is the logo of the Rock Poster Society. But bump. I'm trying to get this to go, but it's.
Our battery is about to die.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, here's some lettering. So this would be a little bit different. The notes that I had were, in general, the lettering in punk was far less fanciful than the psychedelics and was dirtier, grittier, and often based on type you could steal or draw. Many posters were made by folks who would not describe themselves as artists or designers. So there isn't a premium placed on skill or draftsmanship. There's quotes for both of those. Making something ugly wasn't necessarily a bad thing. So yes, there's a fantastic, I don't know. I can't read who actually did that, which is sad because that's a super famous Bad Brains poster. And then this is a really great example of lettering done from stencils and spray paint, which I don't know, maybe it was a precursor to graffiti as well.
Tell me when you want me to go to the next slide.
We'll go to the next slide. That's fine. I've already run out of things to say. Oh, here's some more good examples of cut up and pasted lettering. Of course, that's a classic Jamie Reed thing from England. I have no idea who made this poster, but I really like it a lot. It's super cool. I mean, I know that when I was starting to make posters in 70s, 79, 80, whatever, I didn't even have access to like a Xerox machine that could enlarge anything. So you would look through books or magazines and you go, man, look at the size of those letters. There's 2/3 of an alphabet there. I could make posters from that. And so that's kind of where you kind of got stuff from wherever you could find it, and kind of make the most of it. Obviously it doesn't, it's trying to tell you what it needs to say. It's not trying to fool you into spending the next half an hour immersing yourself in what could this possibly be about. Man, these people must be cool. I want to go and hang out with them. But then again, yeah, maybe they did think that people would think, oh, those people are cool. I want to go hang out with them. So I don't know. But it's just a different audience, I think. Indeed.
Round 3, black and white versus color. Well, color was a very critical part. One of the other hallmarks of the psychedelic was the use of intense colors that often clashed and created a vibrating effect with the eye. These posters, these 3 are all by Victor Moscoso, and Moscoso had studied color theory under Joseph Albers at Yale, and so he was well aware of the rule that said you do not put colors of equal intensity next to each other because they cause irritation to the eye. And the reason for that is because the eye can't distinguish which is the foreground color and which is the background color. So in any case, Moscoso quickly realized that he was going to do the opposite and jam the colors up as much as he could to create this psychedelic effect. These posters, actually on the far right, you see, by the way, a great example of, again, channeling the Art Nouveau image with a peacock. And in there's actually 3 different types of lettering. It's a very beautiful poster by Moscoso. And then here's a couple of other Moscosos. He was the great colorist of the psychedelic poster artists. Oh, one more thing was that the main rock posters, none of them used Dayglow inks. Now, there were also posters made not to advertise concerts, but just be sold to teenagers in poster stores, and those are called head shop posters, and those often used Dayglow. So when you think about the black light lit rooms, those are all going to be what they call head shop posters, not the traditional rock posters, because these were funded by the promoters and they didn't want to spend the money. So this was all CMYK.
In most cases, punk posters were black and white because there wasn't another option. Before color printing and copying was widely available, you were at the mercy of the technology you could access and afford. Instead of bemoaning the fact that you couldn't have a color poster printed, you leaned into the black and white, in which case, who wrote this shit? Which most cases was as colorful as the subject matter required, and did what could be reproduced cheaply and easily. Also, most punk shows were in places much smaller than the Fillmore, and poster design and printing budgets were meager, if at all. So hold on, go back for just one second. So I just wanted to, I think these are great examples of black and white. This Poison Idea poster is by one of the heroes of my hometown, the Portland, Oregon punk scene. A poster by Buns, who kind of took some of Raymond Pettibone's ideas to heart and started, they all became, almost like short stories. I'm not really sure what they're saying, but Buns was the man for a certain kind of punk flyer.
It's a boxing poster, Mike. There's people boxing in
Yeah,
it.
exactly. That's right. That's right. And the important part is that Elvis is king, apparently. I don't know who made this. I think it's fantastic. Next slide. Yeah, the posters from the San Francisco band Crime. They had a very specific kind of aesthetic. They all kind of looked like I don't know, criminals from 1930s gangster movies, and so all they were, even live they appeared to be black and white. So it was kind of perfect for them. I don't know. This is. I'm not sure if the person who made this poster drew it this way, or this has just been Xeroxed so many times that it's just completely distorted. But either way, I like it a lot, and I think it it gets across. It gets a lot of feeling across in its gruesome simplicity.
Round 4, image appropriation.
Image appropriation.
So the
All stolen.
the psychedelic poster artists borrowed imagery from just all over the place to try to just delight and entertain their audience. They
And
were
appall me.
they were wide range foragers, taking influence from all sorts of different places, reading all sorts of different books, and stealing the images. Indeed, in the upper left-hand corner, these are all by Mouse and Kelly, by the way, and they worked together. As Mouse was the hand, Mouse did the lettering, and Kelly did the art direction and the image selection, that type of thing.
Cut up the pages of library books.
Exactly. So the upper left, the zigzag poster, was June 1966, and a lot of the posters, the images were selected with sort of a wink, sort of like a little inside joke, So here you have zigzag tobacco papers, but of course they were being used for joints. So when he did this poster,
if you were in the scene, you knew that.
Exactly, that was the
Wink,
idea.
Wink.
Exactly. So Mouse and Kelly, when Mouse did this poster, he actually cleaned his apartment and made sure there wasn't even a seed in it, and left town. He was so fearful that he was going to be arrested. Marijuana at that point was very much against the law. And again, LSD was still legal at that point, but not pot. So anyway, not only did he not get busted by the police, but Zigzag didn't bust him either, because they realized they have $1 million ad campaign for pot smokers now, which they couldn't do normally because it was taboo. In the bottom left-hand corner, you have Smokey the Bear, Keep California Green, wink, wink. And he's got a guitar in his left hand instead of a shovel, and also looks quite stoned. The upper right, in the peace poster there, you have Pooh and Piglet walking off to the sunset. Pooh has a kilo under his left arm, and Piglet is smoking a joint. The center poster, of course, the Skeletons and Roses. The image came from a book of Persian poems, the Rubaiyat by Khayyam, and they found this in the library, San Francisco General Library, and they said, "My gosh, this is perfect for this. We have to advertise this band called the Grateful Dead." But there's no Xerox machine. They were in the rare books section anyway, and so Kelly took out a penknife and sliced it out of the book, rolled it up.
Those guys.
There you go. And then another one on the far right.
Hippies destroy libraries. It's not good.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, this is one of the few instances where the punks and the psychedelics were on the same page. Images exist to be appropriated and made into something new. Since almost everything was stolen from somewhere, it could be difficult to pick out just a few examples. And these are pretty half-ass examples, but I picked them out anyway.
Not bad.
Yeah,
Did either style really change anything?
No.
Yeah. Well, on to the next one. No, just back. Okay, just kidding. All right. Mike, you ignorant slut. I finally got to use that. Okay. So anyway, um, the posters reflected the movement, the greater movement, the psychedelic movement, and a utopian ideal when it was thought that peace and love could change the world, and that died
Along
out.
with 7-Up.
Very naive, but and the themes of the psychedelic era were quickly co-opted by marketers, especially after Woodstock. So you see that here. But there were legacies that were left behind, particularly care for the earth and its peoples, recycling, ecology, and relaxed hair and
Thank
clothing.
God.
And a hope and optimism that people still yearn for. And two other things I'd say is, one is the psychedelic posters really broke boundaries at the time. And Roger Dean, who is the artist behind Yes, the band Yes, and all the very famous artists, said when he saw Rick Griffin's work, it was profoundly freeing, that he was blown away and thought, I can do anything I want now. So it was breaking the boundaries was a big part of the legacy from an art standpoint. And then finally, lettering as art itself, although you could argue that that has been in the past as well, but certainly with the psychedelic posters, lettering was a principal part of it.
Yeah. Did either style change anything? Probably not. At the present time in our country, it's hard to see much evolution at all. To me, most of the values of the late 60s seem a lot more implied than specific. A pretty flower isn't obviously environmental policy, and free love extolled in the era seemed to be for straight people. I don't think hippies could take much credit for feminism, and soul music of the era did much more for the cause of racial equality than Jimi Hendrix did or wanted to. LSD's destroyed more than the ego, but at least we got some bell-bottom pants out of the deal. The punks did a slightly better job of consciousness raising, but as revolutions tend to do, it fell flat. But at least girls got to play in bands.
Round 6, skulls. Who wore them better? Well, here we've got a couple of examples. The hippie culture tended to embrace a lot, like I said, Native American culture, but also Mexican Indians going down, eating peyote, et cetera. And so the idea of skulls as terrifying things that you want to hide was not really part of their consciousness. They were more friendly, interesting characters, part of life's continuum. But in any case, on the left-hand side, you have a 1970 poster by Randy Tootin, which was a benefit for the Grateful Dead after they were busted down in New Orleans, set up like a bowling pin. And what you have here is a barrister pleading the case against the Grateful Dead as a skeleton, and yet he's chained to something. He's chained to his ideology, and the dead are being judged by the jury of their peers. But of course, it's not a jury of their peers, it's more skeletons. In the center, you have Rick Griffin's Oxymoxa poster. You have a grinning skeleton. And on the far right, we have Alton Kelly's poster from 1968 called Memorial. And this was on for concerts over Memorial Day. And here, this is the Memorial Days when we traditionally honor our fallen heroes. And in this case, he's taken that and made a statement about the Vietnam War by having this image of all these skulls, which came from a museum in Taiwan.
Yeah, I don't buy that the hippie embrace of different cultures was a motivation for the use of skull imagery. Utter mumbo jumbo. Skulls look cool and scary. End of story.
Peace and love versus anarchy and aggression. So the posters, the psychedelic posters, were reflecting the times and reflecting the music and reflecting the cultural movement that was happening, which was a period when people really did think, at least in San Francisco and Haight-Ashbury for a short time, that that peace and love could change the world. Naivete, of course, but you got to start somewhere. In any case, these two posters on the outside are both by Bonnie McLean. She's one of the most prolific and best known of the female poster artists from that period. Both, you see all the peace symbiology around it, and of course you've got Woodstock in the middle.
Is that one in the middle, is that a psychedelic poster?
It's not really, but
Okay, just checking.
it's from the era.
Yeah, okay, whatever, I'm just checking, Ah, well, nothing better characterizes the death of the 60s than Raymond Pettibone's Black Flag poster with Charlie Manson. I haven't seen otherwise, but it seems every psychedelic poster I've seen is about a good trip. Punks brought the bad trip and reveled in it. Who portrayed it better is dependent on your definition. Is the essence of love pretty images and bright colors? In the real world, love and peace are far more complex than that. I believe in tough love. Anger and frustration are probably easier to portray, honestly.
Round 8, LSD versus speed. So for many people, the psychedelic experience was life-changing, and this certainly was true for many of the people in the 60s in Haight-Ashbury, including the artists. Interestingly, Victor Moscoso was asked once if he could draw posters on acid. And you certainly look at some of these posters and say, well, they had to be. But Victor said, yeah, I took acid once and I started drawing and the acid came on and I'm looking at the paper and the paper is starting to move and it's vibrating and it's kind of shimmering and it's alive and I could see the molecules and then I could see the molecules in my pen. And then he just said, I just go outside. And he said it's impossible to draw under acid, but it influenced him after the time period. And another story that he tells is that with LSD, it's like falling down a flight of stairs. And you get to the bottom and your head's flown off and your arms are off and your legs have come off. And then you have to climb back up the stairs and put yourself back together. But as he said, I never put myself back together the same way. And so you see in some of the most outrageous of the psychedelic posters here, examples of just really vivid imaginations. On the left, you have Lee Conklin, which is almost like an Arcimboldo style, the Italian 15th century
That thing is so
artist.
ugly.
It's really
piece of
twisted.
crap.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, but and then in the middle, that's Victor Moscoso with lettering that's just completely out of control. In fact, one doesn't know whether this poster should be hung vertically or horizontally. In fact, the ticket strips are horizontal, but they're on both sides. So I don't even know where to go with that.
And with this one, you couldn't have. I don't think you could Oh, yes, drugs, more drugs,
Well, I mean,
probably speed, probably everything.
but I
All
think,
drugs combined, including your beloved LSD.
but I think that the punk posters were also
Exit free beer.
reflecting what was going on and
Sure.
and what they were advertising, the music,
Yeah.
and the music was aggressive. It was fast. The guitars. I mean, the music was very much reflected by that. So
Sure, sure.
just
Good
trying to help-
point.
just trying to help you out.
Oh yeah, I know. I've lost. I knew I lost this argument before I even suggested it.
I thought he won it before. All right.
No. Oh,
Which is a more pure form of expression. So, I mean, personally, I feel the posters reflected accurately at the time, really the hippie ethos, which is what they were trying to say, what they believed, whether it was naive or not. They were striving to be for authenticity. And I think at the core of it, when we talk about this, love and peace have changed the world, and why is there so much nostalgia for, the 60s? And I think a lot of it was that sort of that attempt to be live a more authentic life. So you can see in these posters, and in many of the posters, it took me years to realize this, but nobody's smiling. And the thing is, the hippie ethos was a plain expression, which basically said, "Take me as I am. I'm not smiling is selling," and that was not something that they were going to necessarily do. So,
I think she's smiling,
well, I'm not sure if she is or not, but she's
but she's naked.
she is naked, and she is strong and powerful and inviting you to be part of the experience. And that was another part of these psychedelic posters, was that they were not just advertising, here's a music, here's a place, here's the price. They were advertising an experience. You were going to come and you're going to find other people like you. You're going to be dancing, you're going to be tripping or high, you're going to have the music, you're going to have the light shows. All of these things were going to be happening.
And the fact that they were advertisement doesn't undo everything you just said about them being free expression and authentic.
Yeah, and they were eagerly collected as art, early on. Here again, you have some of the more famous posters from that period, and the torch and was these were the posters often had sort of what you call hippie symbiology that had meaning to the hippies. The heart, truth, the flame, passion, the music. In the center, we have the famous flying eyeball poster by Rick Griffin, where an eyeball is perhaps the eye of God peering through a portal.
Perhaps.
Well, you have to be kind of, tripping or whatever. And then
I'm still waiting for my acid to kick in, so I'm not getting it.
and then
go ahead.
And then finally, wait, this is moving. Now, on the right, that's actually a poster from Detroit by Carl Lundgren, which is
And that's why it's a lot better than most of the other ones.
another pure form of expression with Vanessa Redgrave actually dancing wildly, and you have this great
And not smiling.
op art. Yeah, that's true. Op art, white and green design behind, and great lettering. And there you are. Mike, the topic is, which is the purer form of expression?
Well, let's see. What did I say about that? Yeah. Most of the yes, these are posters that were made by artists. This is obviously Gary Panter, who also did the Screamers poster from before. But also, I think so many of the posters weren't made by, they were made by the bass player in the band. They weren't necessarily made by people who would have considered themselves artists. And so it's not. I mean, I would say if you're going to say, well, what's the most valid form, or the most purest form of expression, I would vote for the bass player every time, because I mean that's they have a direct connection to the purpose of what they're doing, and they're not pretending to be anything else but the bass player who had to make the flyer. Sometimes they turned into artists. Most of the time they didn't. And I think that's that's, well, we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Yeah, see, this is, hopefully this person is still making these things, because that's fucking awesome.
I'm going to agree.
Yeah. And they wore the skull pretty well too.
Round 10. And by the way, we've decided to amp this up, and we're going to 11.
Oh, we're going to 11.
Turn it up to 11.
It started at 10, and then it was 15, and then it was 13, and then it was 10, and now it's 11. So I guess this is 10.
We had Don King negotiating the contract.
I know. It's, you know.
So utopian vision versus persecuted rage.
Oh.
The search for authenticity and self-awareness and cosmic vision by the travelers of the late 1960s. It was kind of based on, one of the hallmarks of the era was the concept of the Age of Aquarius. They were very much into astrology, and the Age of Aquarius was supposed to be a time that would usher in greater human consciousness and great things, almost like a renaissance of the human culture. And you can read about it on Wikipedia. In any case,
it worked perfectly.
As Jacaber Castor says in our movie, Jacaber was the owner of the Psychedelic Solution poster store in Greenwich Village from 1986 to 2006. And he was supposed to be here tonight, so I'm going to mangle this quote and it won't matter. But he said, many of us at the time believed that it could happen. We were 100% sure that it was going to happen. We weren't sure exactly how, but we just felt that there were new ways to live, new ways to dress, new ways to express ourselves. And these posters represent the attempt to create a new culture. It was a cultural movement beyond just the posters, just the music, the whole thing. So that's my utopian vision.
Cool. What's I going to say here? Let's see. Is it better to portray a world you want but can never have, or a world that you have but can't get away from? Just as the 60s artists were presenting various versions of heaven, the punks were often portraying versions of hell, a dystopian world that was probably pretty far removed from boring suburban homes where many punks lived their day-to-day lives. Both artists were presenting a fantasy, though punk posters were probably more accurate of what was.
Do you have another one?
Yeah, there's this whole thing, this sort of like tormented kind of skinhead Jesus figure that comes up in a lot of posters, and he seems like I don't know, he's either rocking out or he's being electrocuted or something. And then of course this is the psychedelics have their big five. We have the punks probably have a big three at best, and that would be one of them, and that's Pusshead and his overly grotesque version of something.
Yeah, I think that the psychedelic posters, as I said, are advertising a whole experience. They're advertising more than just the music. And I think that punk posters are doing the same thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, in my sense, it's a warning. It's just like, Ted, you do not want to go anywhere.
Right, but maybe
I'm going to get beat up.
Yeah, but maybe your kids do.
But yeah, I think they're great. Round 11. Who left a more important legacy?
The
psychedelic posters leave a rich, colorful tapestry of a period of great social change and upheaval, tearing apart the norms that had come before in the 1950s. So, as Victor Moscoso said, he said, "We broke all the rules. And if you're an artist, that's what you can do as an artist. And if you have the opportunity, it's what you should do." And So these posters were really radical at the time, reflecting a really radical attempt at changing society. As Marty Balin says, it was part of a colorful time, and it was a naive time, perhaps, but it was the baby boomers' time, and that hope for a better world was their legacy. There should be some music here at this point, I know.
I'm glad there isn't.
Are you ready? Tell me when.
Yeah, go ahead. So it's no wonder that the 60s, the art of the 60s is revered. It is nostalgia in its most potent form. Artifacts from a world that, from the most part, no longer exists. Posters for dead rock stars from a simpler time when anything was possible. Seductive to collectors, generally understood to be art. Intoxicating stuff indeed. But psychedelic art, despite its legion of fans, appears to be a dead end. Its time has passed. It only exists as a reference point. New psychedelic art cannot escape its history. For better or worse, the world has moved on. Punk as a design style is all around us and is a living thing. The world is a sad, anxious, chaotic place, and the punk aesthetic with its torn pages, distorted type, and ironic images, for better or worse, fits today to a T. And
But Mike,
I'm not going to drop the mic.
Mike, tell us about this image.
Oh, this is the Green Day punk bunny coffee from 7-Eleven.
And did you design that, or you just?
Fuck no, I didn't design any of this thing that's in this. I think it's just. I just think it's it's ridiculous, but it does illustrate my point that punk as something that's kind of all around us in a way that, I mean, not you, because you live as a psychedelic American. You live in your chosen lifestyle. You are surrounded by psychedelia, but you don't. I mean, there's a reason why you had to pick the 7-Up ad from 1971 as an example of psychedelic in the kind of in the commercial space. I think this idea that there's like punk shit is everywhere and psychedelic is at your gallery.
Yes, but it's also here at Poster House behind my right shoulder.
I also noticed that about half of those were all ones in the slideshow. Yeah, but
okay.
There's about 110 downstairs that were made by a guy.
Yes, actually a real artist, not a faker like me. So we're done, and but we'll take questions. How's that? Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you can go now. That's it.
Sure. Well, the question is about the Grateful Dead music being psychedelic, and I mean, I think for sure. I mean, they were the torch bearers for psychedelia. I think that their early albums, certainly things like Viola Lee Blues and Oxymox, that album, the third album, the second album, Caution, Do Not Stop in the Tracks, Alligator, all that stuff, that's wildly psychedelic. But the thing is about the Grateful Dead is that the psychedelic poster movement was very short-lived. It was 1966 to 1969, 70-ish. And then basically the growth of FM radio and the coverage of rock and roll by newspapers, which were not covering rock and roll in 1966 to any degree. The promoters started using these other vehicles instead of posters to sell tickets to the concerts. So the posters pretty much died out. But the Grateful Dead, especially by like sort of the mid to late 70s, they were the only psychedelic survivors. Basically, Jeff Snare playing became Jefferson Starship, Country Joe and the Fish.
They built this city.
Big Brother. All that, you go down the whole list. All the bands broke up. They were all gone.
Or died.
If you were a counterculture follower, if you were a hippie wannabe, or if you just liked the music as well. But basically, the Grateful Dead were the only game in town. So there were a lot of posters that were done afterwards, like a 1988 Peter Max poster for Grateful Dead. There's a number of posters that are at least semi-psychedelic, that followed the Dead through the years.
So I get to answer this question too. There's only one thing worse than bad psychedelic posters, and that's the Grateful Dead.
Mike, you ignorant slut.
I mean, how long was the punk era? Did it? It's people were still listening. It's still going. It exists. It's punk eras continue to this day around the world everywhere. There's punk music everywhere. Yeah.
Hi. Do you think that if the punk bands had the same kind of budget as Bill Graham, the posters would have been as raw?
I would say yes, because that fit the aesthetic of the music. I think that I mean, you can make a full color big budget punk rock poster, but
It fit the aesthetic. You're totally right.
Right. Well, that's I mean that's the thing. It's like the Fillmore. How many people could go to the Fillmore? What's the
1,500.
1,500 at the Fillmore. Mabuhay Gardens in San Francisco, 250. I mean, just much smaller places, and probably not. Well, I don't know. They probably run very similarly, but with a different emphasis on whatever it is they were trying to do. But I think you would still have the same kind of raw aesthetic, despite whatever the budget is. I mean, because it kind of doesn't make sense if all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that Circle Jerks poster looks great with that naked lady right there. It's like, yeah, maybe you could do that once, but it kind of doesn't really make sense, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say, I really enjoyed your format. Okay. But I was thinking about how you overlap, how the two eras overlap. Generations will always do 180s, from
Sure.
the previous, right? So you do have in common, and I love this museum, by the way. So what I'm about to say may not sound that way, but you started out as advertising, cheap or expensive otherwise, but now they're in frames.
Yeah.
And we're collecting them, and we're holding on to them like the Talmud. When did you start archiving your work?
I really haven't. I mean, I don't really have I have an archive of just random stuff or things that I've printed that I didn't get rid of all of them of. I'd probably made at least 1,000 posters before it even occurred to me to even hold on to them. They never really, I never held them in particularly high regard. I never trained as a designer. I never was like really hired as an artist and in a pure sense by anybody. So it all kind of came about after the fact, when I did my book, which is available in the gift shop here, and contains 1,800 posters. I was totally at the mercy of poster collectors to get me access to the material because I didn't have it. I haven't been there. I had an opportunity, but I was there briefly, but I was just too tired to actually go. From the photos I've seen, it seems to focus on a very specific kind of era, which is not terribly interesting to me. I'm kind of not all that big on that kind of, a world where Bad Religion is a really big band. And so some of that stuff is not, I mean, I'm sure I would still enjoy it, but I haven't been there, and I know that they don't have any of my stuff in it, but that's mostly because I got somebody's business card and didn't get back to them. So maybe they would, I don't know. But also, I gotta say, it's in Las Vegas, so it's got at least a strike against it from the get-go.
Yes.
What was the effect on posters from sort of the great New York famous artists like from early pop? What was the effect on psychedelic rock posters from Warhol, Johns, Indiana, and what was the effect on punk posters by later pop or street artists like Basquiat, Herring, Sharp, that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I think that I think that Warhol definitely, on a couple different levels, sort of had a pretty big influence. His, kind of Warhol's kind of sleazy aesthetic or whatever seemed to fit in perfectly with the, burgeoning punk scene in New York, which was, so I think, and there was some kind of crossover with some of those folks. I know, like, like Jane County from Jane County, and was it the Electric Chairs or whatever her band was, she was kind of a crossover, not quite superstar, but part of that same kind of world. As far as I feel like I'm not quite knowledgeable to speak about it other than that. Also, I also know that the fact that Warhol was printing his own work was inspirational on some level to me and to other people who got around to screen printing stuff. So I know that was that was certainly an influence. And I also think that a lot of the Electric Chairs and the crime victims and all of that sort of stuff, I think, was definitely some of the bedrock. Well, and Warhol's involvement with Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground, I think all of those built a pretty solid foundation for New York punk. That's my opinion.
I don't think the West Coast 60s artists were really influenced at all by the pop art movement per se. And the thing is, they weren't professionally trained artists either. The only one that was professionally trained was Victor Moscoso. The others were more like kind of, cartoonists, self-taught artists. They became artists, but they weren't formally trained. So they weren't studying. And I know that Wes Wilson, we have him in the film talking about how he's designing women. He sees women. He's like, I don't see him as de Kooning. He sees a woman. De Kooning's woman, of course, a famous piece. And, the whole abstract expressionists, for example, were really kind of rejected by the San Francisco poster artists. Victor Moscoso said, I tried to do an abstract expressionist painting once, and I just had to paint over it. And Lee Conklin
that was that day he took that acid, right?
No, I think it was another day, but
okay.
But Lee Conklin also said, I had to do, abstract expressionism was what you had to do. And he didn't want to do it. He wanted to do his cartooning, and basically that led into his genre of posters. But
well, as Victor Moscoso said to me after a long weekend in San Francisco, where he completely ignored me at the end, he said, "Stick with it, kid. You'll be okay."
Well, there you go.
Sorry, I had to squeeze in my.
Go ahead.
So this brings up a question about print technique and print run of these posters.
Yeah.
I would say punk, a lot of it done on Xerox machines,
Sure.
black and white Xerox.
Sure.
Psychedelic screen printing.
No, the psychedelic posters were all machine lithos. Screen printing took too long and was more expensive, hand done process. So the machine lithos in the spring of 1966, the press runs were 500 to 800. They got to be about 1,000 by, say, May or June of 66. By October, the press runs were up to 3,500, because at that point, the posters were avidly collected by just the people in the streets. So the press runs increased, dramatically at that point. Pardon?
They're always in spot.
Occasionally, but mostly they had to save money. They were just regular CMYK. Yeah. So and then today's gig poster artists. If you go to a concert today, you're buying a poster that's not advertising the concert; it's commemorating the concert. Those are almost always beautiful silk screens.
Unless I made them, and then they're okay. They're okay. But yeah, I know that some of the things that I have a whole list of things that I've done that I'm still looking for, and some of them I know there was only like 10. Because there wasn't, it's like I was making flyers for things that no one was going to go to anyway. It's like, yeah, I made 10 flyers. I hoped 10 people would show up, and sometimes they did, and sometimes they didn't. So yes, and also the fact is, as he said, at the time, people were avidly collecting these things. In the early punk days, people were avidly ignoring them at best. I mean, no one was really paying attention. So the kind of the acceptance of the world, the mainstream world, is that's art, and the other stuff maybe not. And they may have a point. I don't know, but yeah, the quantities were really, really small. I mean, even at the point, some of the stuff that's downstairs, like the Nirvana with another cool band, which was at the Fox Theater in Portland, which holds 2,000 people. I know there was 600 posters printed. Okay, make it good. Don't let us down. A really good one. Okay, good.
I was thinking about, I see few, if any, Gen Zs in the room, but I was thinking, I'm a professor, and if you wanted the Gen Zs to take away something formally, aesthetically, or ideologically, or really hook them on your era, what would you say?
My era.
Your punk, hook them on punk posters, or hook them on psychedelic posters. How would you hook them? What do you think would relate to them? How can you sell it on how that relates to today?
Because it relates to today. It's now. I mean, it is. I think something that's alive and now is more valuable than something that's historically reverential. Absolutely. I mean, I'm being brief and contrary because it's my nature.
So I would say that the psychedelic poster era was had a definable aesthetic. It was a legitimate art movement which was reacting against the previous style in a very radical way, and was a notable group of artists who, as I said, combined for a group aesthetic as such. And as the judge said, I think there's a judge somewhere that's in the pornography case was like, I don't know what I can't define pornography, but I know what it is when I see it. And I think that's true of a psychedelic poster. It can be hard to describe, but you certainly know it. And it symbolized a specific period in time when it was thought that a new culture could change the world. And so there you go. That's what I'd say.
And mostly it just changed posters.
Well, it certainly did.
That would probably be your lasting legacy right there of the Summer of Love.
Thanks, Mike.
Why is all this? We have to be free, and it seems like punk just went, I don't know, just negated everything to me. I mean, what was going on?
It was the late 1970s was a very dystopian period, especially in New York. The world had swung back to New York. San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury in the late 60s was was where it was at. It was swing in London in 1965. By 66, and especially 1967, it was Haight-Ashbury. San Francisco was the center of the cultural world. You had Paul McCartney and George Harrison both made separate pilgrimages to Haight-Ashbury to see what it was all about for themselves. But by the time you get to the late 70s, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for, exhibitions and exploring this dystopian period with Keith Haring and Basquiat and the punk artists and the punk aesthetic in this horrible, dangerous, dystopian, nearly bankrupt world that was New York City in the late 70s.
Is New York City.
And also, one thing you have to remember is Bill Graham was the curator of that movement. So he really was the gatekeeper for that in a very discrete period between this Fillmore East and Fillmore West, whereas the punk movement exploded nationwide. So the aesthetic was as varied.
Exactly, because it was a kind of a worldwide phenomenon versus something focused on San Francisco. The one other thing I just wanted to say real quick about San Francisco in general, San Francisco has a long history of being a place, where counterculture type things happen and where way too many people go to see them and ultimately ruin them. I mean, that was the beatniks of North Beach in the 50s and 60s, where there'd be tour buses pulling up. Look, a beatnik, and then the same thing with the all the kids wanted to, oh, we're all going to go to San Francisco and we'll have flowers on our hair, and then there was also an entire industry of, oh, let's go to San Francisco and look at hippies,
the hippie tour bus.
and it happened too in the punk era as well. I mean, I remember spending time, on North Beach, and there people would just go to gawk at the punks, and I think that's a whole sort of shadow industry of San Francisco is sort of exploiting these various movements
At the Barbary Coast.
Yeah.
All right, so we have dinner reservations. So,
I don't.
And maybe so
I
do you.
can stay all night.
Or Mike's available.
I'm available. Thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see you out on the streets.